Viewers, democracies can be disrupted. That much we know. Digital guerrillas, international governments, fronts for anarchists that pass off as think tanks have been found to have influenced outcomes of the US elections of 2016, Brexit and other major global events. But what if these unseen forces have now turned their attention to India? What if it's been going on now for a significant period of time, except that the means and methods have become even more potent? What if there is an insidious plot to dismantle India's democracy? Quite often, you've heard the Modi government's managers coming out and talking about the elusive foreign hand, overseas lashkars, academics, activists funded by India's global competitors, or Modi government's ideological antagonists. But how much of this is actually true? How much of this is obfuscation or scapegoating, gaslighting? Call it what you want to. Let's talk to Indian-born American author, Hindutva activist Rajiv Malhotra, who has just written a second book called Snakes in the Ganga, implying that Break India forces are actively undermining every Indian institution with a view of destabilizing India. The book is being widely touted as a sequel to his widely received and acclaimed book, Breaking India, released in 2012. Thank you, Mr. Malhotra, for speaking to me on Converse. Let me first ask you.
Thank you, Rahul.
Let me begin by asking you.
Thank you, Rahul, for having me.
You're most welcome, sir. Let me just ask you, simple question. Can you break down the meaning of the name of this book, Snakes in the Ganga? In one of your interviews, you mentioned that the name is a metaphor. Can you explain?
Yes. The name is a metaphor that says that the dangers are snakes, the people, the individuals, ideas, and institutions that threaten India with poison. This is an intellectual warfare going on, and that it's a metaphor for that poison. The snakes are a metaphor for the poisonous entities, be they ideas, individuals, or institutions. And the metaphor of Ganga is that we don't expect snakes there. We don't expect poison there. We expect it to be a safe place. So the fact that these snakes are hidden from public view is why I've used the Ganga metaphor. And that's what snakes in the Ganga means: hidden threats that threaten the integrity and sovereignty of India.
Now, the last book you wrote, or the first in what can be loosely called perhaps is a prequel to this one, was called Breaking India. Now, I want to ask you, are there new dangers compared to the ones discussed in your earlier classic book, written over a decade ago? Are the forces in some way, and this is, we need to be a little more specific, when you say breaking India, in what manner do you mean that there are apparent forces at work to annihilate the nation?
So the earlier book was focusing on breaking India forces like the global church and Dravidianists and so on. Now, those haven't gone away, but the new book talks about this whole woke is critical caste theory, the whole idea of breaking India according to the latest fashionable left-wing global discourse. And the center of this is Harvard University, which is what we demonstrate in this book. And there are many, many centers studying India from a point of view of South Asia studies, humanities, even public health. And some of this money is being funded by Indian billionaires. We point that out also. So Harvard is the latest. It's like Oxford was during the East India Company. Oxford was providing the brain power and developing these policies and theories and a whole lot of dirt on India. And then this would affect the parliament. Same way, Harvard produces the knowledge which is sent back to India, to various Indian places from where it's disseminated, various legal campaigns, various PR campaigns against India, and also training government officials, feeding the US Congress, feeding the US Senate, and feeding the human rights establishments all over the world, the BBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Harvard is sort of what I call the nest of snakes, from where a very large population of such people and ideas have been developed. And we give, this is a 900-page book, and we give a detailed account with a lot of evidence and a lot of testimony from all sorts of people. Most of the things we are quoting are from Harvard's own sources. Their websites, their YouTubes, their dissertations are full of this anti-India and Hindu-phobic rhetoric, and we are basically compiling that and giving a whole theory of why they're doing it, where it's coming from, what is their goal, and who's funding it.
Harvard is a very credible institution, Mr. Malhotra. Why would they be invested in wanting to dismantle India specifically? And what is this evidence that you're talking about? Can you elaborate? Because this is a very serious charge.
Yeah, it is a very serious charge, and I don't take it lightly. And I am more than happy to be cross-examined and to give out more details than we published, because we published maybe just the tip of the iceberg. But Harvard is not dismantling India only. It is dismantling. There is a whole thesis which has come out from the extreme left of the Democratic Party. Now it's taken over the Democratic Party. But this thesis is actually older. And, you know, I've supported the Democrats most of my life, and I know all these candidates, and I've funded them. But I'm very embarrassed to say that they've let me down. And this very, under the name of liberal, they've gone into what is called critical race theory. And critical race theory has been mapped onto India, where they say that the Dalits are the blacks of India, the Brahmins and upper caste are the whites of India. And so the American race theory, American history of racism, is now being projected to understand and interpret India. This is all over the place. This is, I mean, you cannot, if you know anyone in Harvard who takes courses in humanities and social sciences, this is what they are teaching. So there are books written which are attacking IITs. This morning I put out a tweet, just watch that. There is Ajanta Subramaniam, a professor at Harvard, very eminent professor, whose book, basically 400 pages, says that IITs are basically casteist and they are anti-minority. They are basically oppressing the minorities of India, and basically a call for dismantling that structure. And it's not individual professors here and there or students that are blamed, but the very DNA, the very tattva, the very essence of IITs is being attacked. And this is a book I have critiqued in my book. I've given a 45 page chapter critiquing and responding to this book on that attacks IITs. So in this way, what I've done in this Snakes in the Ganga is taken 4 or 5 major thinkers from this nest of snakes and given one chapter each to respond to their work point by point, quoting them. So they are welcome to come back and respond, and we will be happy to entertain a good conversation with them.
Mr. Malhotra, what really are the motives? Why would Harvard be investing so much to dismantle India or its institutions, or, as you have said, even perhaps influence a large number of Indian academics, thought leaders, etc., in movements that are camouflaged along human rights, social justice, women's empowerment, LGBTQ empowerment, pluralism, free speech, democracy, and other such buzzwords? Why?
So there is Harvard as an institution, which is not officially as an institution taking a political stand on anything. But within Harvard are groups of people, individuals, and the group that is in power, the group that is deciding on the dissertation committees and the workshops and conferences, who gets in, who's canceled, who's kept out, that group happens to have a certain ideology. And this has evolved over time. So the latest danger that India faces is that there is something called the Afro-Dalit, hyphenated Afro-Dalit coalition, where Suraj Yengde, a Dalit at the Harvard Kennedy School, has teamed up with Cornel West, one of the most prominent African Americans at Harvard, and they've created this new thing called Afro-Dalit identity, which says that the Dalits are the blacks of India, and all the race policies, all the race theories that have been spun in the United States to attack white supremacy should now be applied to India, because India is where there is this white supremacy in the name of caste. So, you know, I know there is caste problem. I'm very sympathetic to the Dalits. I would like these problems to be sorted out within the Indian constitution, within the Indian framework, not something with a danda from Harvard. So the problem is Harvard becoming like the new Oxford, wanting to provide this intellectual, ammunition to those who are of this point of view. And the reason why the people are of this point of view is more complex.
Okay. Mr. Mahotra, in the past, in the 50s, we've had sociologists in America, for example, examining or loosely describing America as a casteist society. Mirdal, for example, borrowed from India to suggest this. So was he also invested in dismantling America? I mean, people can have different theses. You have a thesis, someone else has a thesis. Why does it amount to suggesting that someone is deliberately wanting to bring down or create all sorts of schisms in society?
So, you know, in the last year or two, there was a famous conference to dismantle Hindutva. It was called the Dismantling Hindutva Conference. And after that, that conference got a lot of limelight. But people did not go deep enough to see where it's coming from, which is what I have done. But the fact that these things emerge all over the place, there is all this talk that democracy is a sham in India, you know, that India is fascist, India is right-wing, Modi is a fascist. All this is coming. All this is all over the place. It's not like I'm making it up. The people who are proposing these things are quite proud of it. They are not hiding. It's not you don't need to do forensic work to uncover all this. The originality in this book is not the evidence that these things are happening, but where is it coming from and who's behind it and where are the funding mechanisms. That's, I think, what's original in this book. Now, people have talked about American racism and America having a caste system for a very long time. And within the Constitution, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, all the way to Barack Obama, they were working very much within the Constitution. This business of wanting to break up the structures of society is a very recent thing. In fact, the critical race theory wallahs don't like even Gandhi and they don't like Martin Luther King because those people were working within existing structures and wanted to remodel and upgrade and reform the structures, whereas the latest view is that you should not reform the structures, you should dismantle them. This comes from a Marxist thesis, antithesis. The antithesis has to dismantle the thesis. It's not about reform. It's not about compromise. It's not about win-win. It's not. In fact, if you go there and say, if a white person goes to any of these places and says, I'm actually a very liberal guy, I have never had any prejudice against a black person, and, or a equivalent Brahmin goes and says, in my life, I haven't done anything against Dalits, they'll be shouted down. Because what they're saying is that you are preserving and perpetuating the structures of abuse by saying that those structures can be repaired. The structures are beyond repair, you have to dismantle them. So this idea of dismantling old structures is actually a Marxist idea, and that made its way into the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and from there, this critical race theory has been born, and now this critical race theory is being transformed into critical caste theory. So that's what is new about this book.
Okay, last question, and this is a question that obviously will be asked of you. Is yours an attempt to discredit dissenters, those that might not agree with the current politics of our country, the government, the dispensation, the ideological inclinations? Is that what you're doing? It's a smear campaign. You've picked up certain departments, people, etc., and you've gone after them.
So basically, it's they who are blocking us. The smear campaign would be if I were to not want to listen to them, not want to sit down with them. I have made one offer after another to all the people I'm criticizing. I can come to your forum, you can come to my forum, have a neutral moderator, let's get our facts out, and let's have an amicable conversation. I offer this to your listeners. If the Harvard people are watching or their sponsors are watching, I'm available to come to Rahul's show or any neutral show and debate these guys. The point is they don't want to do that. Why don't they want to do that? That's because there is something called cancel culture. Cancel culture means that nowadays you do not allow opponents because you just don't want them, and you want to create what they call a counter hegemony. So they are into this business of dismantling structures, using a counter hegemony, and blocking dissent, blocking opponents. So they are the ones who control the microphone. I don't control any media. I don't control any Ivy League. I don't control the government. I have no institutional control over any mechanism of knowledge flow. I'm an individual. So how can I be the one accused of controlling them? They are the ones who are trying to silence their opponents.
Rajiv Mahotra, thank you very much for speaking to me. It promises to be a provocative book, at the very least. But let me tell you, viewers, there's ample evidence cited, literally over 1,000 endnotes and several pages of bibliography. So this is not some person sitting down and ranting against anyone. This is well researched. I've gone through some of the footnotes, etc. And I think it will make for an engaging exercise in trying to understand what's really happening. Thank you very much, Mr. Mahotra. We'll speak after you launch your book, and we'll have more conversations about the meat and substance of that book. Thank you very much.
Rahul, delighted to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.